Welcome to this video where we will study the underlying origin of the decision cost in machine learning-based early decision making. This is the last video of this series which presents the ideas of the founding papers of this new research area. This slide shows a summary of the challenges proposed in this paper and which were presented in the previous videos. This video presents the last challenge which considers time-varying decision costs. In order to properly understand this challenge, we must first study the deep origin of the decision costs. In the previous videos, an important step was missing, which occurs right after a decision is triggered. When a decision is triggered, the system predicts a label and launches the execution of a task, which depends on the predicted class. This task must be completed before the deadline T. In the case of early classification, the decision costs were considered as inputs of the algorithms. Namely, it is a misclassification cost, which is a matrix, and to which it is added the delay cost, which is a time-dependent function. To understand the deep meaning of the decision costs, it is necessary to detail the task to be performed more precisely. This task is in fact a directed acyclic graph composed of elementary actions represented by the nodes of the graph. These elementary actions have dependencies which are represented by the arcs of the graph. These DAGs are dependent on the predicted class and must be executed before the deadline T. Let us now study the meaning of the delay cost. If we consider a particular value of the function, this value corresponds to the cost of executing the DAG of task in the time remaining before the deadline T. In other words, we have a limited amount of time to execute the DAG of task which corresponds to the predicted class. Using this definition, we find out that the delay cost should depend on the predicted class, which is not the case in the literature. Let us now move to the stage where the DAG is executed in limited time. We can observe that the later the decision is triggered, the less time is left to execute the DAG of task. In order to reduce the execution time of this DAG, it is possible to parallelize it. And to do so, we can increase the number of workers, each of which executes a subtask. Then, the sub-results are combined to form the final result of the task. This last step can be extremely costly if the number of workers is very large. We can make the analogy with MapReduce, which was used when Hadoop was very popular. Technically, this parallelization cost cannot be avoided. All this explains the shape of the curve which defines the delay cost. This function is necessarily increasing over time. Since the less time is left to run the DAG, the more workers are needed. Finally, this function should even tend toward infinity when the deadline T is reached. Let us now study the underlying origin of the cost of changing decisions. As a reminder, the cost of changing a decision takes the form of a matrix. Each cell in this matrix gives the cost of a decision change given the previous decision. For example, if we zoom in one of a cell of this matrix, the value corresponds to the cost of changing the DAG of task to be executed. In this case, the execution of the DAG associated with class A has already begun. Then, this decision is revoked and the execution of the DAG corresponding to class B begins. More precisely, the cost of changing the decision is the sum of the costs associated with the tasks which have already been executed in the DAG corresponding to class A and which cannot be reused in the execution of the DAG of class B. As you can see, some tasks can be reused, as it is the case of task 2 which appear in blue. From this definition, it appears that the cost of changing decision should depend on the amount of time our system has been left on the previous decision. Indeed, the more time elapses between the decision and its revocation, the more tasks have been executed in the previous DAG of tasks. Now we come to the central question of this video. What's happened when the DAG of task to be executed depends on both the predicted class and the triggering time. In the following illustration, the considered time period is split into 3 subperiods, corresponding to different regimes. If the decision is triggered early enough and class A is predicted, the nominal operation regime applies. In this case, the DAG of task is complete and corresponds to the nominal operation of our system. If the decision is triggered a little later, the DAG of task is simplified because it must be executed under time constraints and it cannot necessarily be parallelized. Finally, if the decision is triggered very late, it corresponds to a highly deteriorated operation of our system, and the DAG of task to be executed is even more simplified. This slide shows the example of an aircraft landing. If this decision is largely anticipated, it is a normal landing where the DAG of task is complete and includes all the safety steps, both for the passengers and the aircraft. If the decision to land the aircraft is later, the pilot is forced to simplify the DAG of task. The landing will be turbulent and therefore uncomfortable for the passengers, and not all the procedure for checking the aircraft will be done. Finally, if it is a very late decision, we are facing a real emergency landing. The pilot is able to land the aircraft and save all the passengers, but there will be definitely very costly material damages. Here is a general schema of machine learning-based early decision making where a new model appears at the end of the process. It is a scheduling strategy which provides the DAGs of tasks according to the predicted class and according to the triggering time. In our previous example, this planning strategy will correspond to the ideal behavior of the pilot of the aircraft. It will be able to produce an optimal DAG to land the aircraft at any triggering time. Formalizing this type of problem is very difficult. Indeed, there is an interdependence between the triggering model and the planning strategy. On the one hand, the DAG of task provided by the planning strategy defines the decision cost by its structure. In the other hand, there is also a dependency in the other direction. Indeed, the optimal triggering time depends on the decision cost, and the DAG provided by the planning strategy also depends on the decision time. Finally, this type of problem is very difficult to solve directly and is called a fixed point optimization problem. In this case, the objective is to optimize a function which takes as input the optimal solution. In future work, it would be certainly very difficult to develop approaches that directly optimize this type of function. However, a setting where the planning strategy will be observed could be considered, for example, by simulation. Typically, in reinforcement learning, the DAGs provided by the planning strategy could be part of the environment and thus could be observed. To conclude this video series, here is an overview of the challenges we proposed to develop the machine learning-based early decision-making research field. First, the challenges that appear in blue are related to the learning task. In video number 4, we talked about the development of data-agnostic approaches. The challenges related to online machine learning-based early decision-making appear in green on the slide. Finally, in video number 6, we talked about revocable decisions. And in this last video, we just talked about time-dependent decision costs. I hope you have enjoyed this series of introductory videos on machine learning-based early decision-making. If you want to go further, I encourage you to read the papers indicated in the description of this video. For a more complete scientific introduction, you can watch the video of Youssef Achenchabe's PhD defense, also linked in the description of this video. Finally, you can watch what's coming soon on the GitHub, dedicated to machine learning-based early decision-making. We plan to put there a lot of interesting things, such as Python libraries, tutorials, and other videos. Thank you very much. See you soon.